Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Tricia.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm great. I guess I could say it's a Friday. We'll tell our owners or our listeners it's a Friday so they can celebrate along with us.
Yes, indeed. TGIF for sure.
Definitely. I am here with Michael Fedor. He is the author of How to Kill a Bull Moose. I feel that's right, correct? Yes, that's right. I feel like there's so much to unpack in this book. Do you want to start us off? Tell us about the characters, a little bit about the plot, and then I'll jump in with my questions.
Yeah, so What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose is a story that I started to write 20 years ago. The world was a little different back then, and I was trying to get some of my experiences out on paper, and it wasn't very good. So I went back to the drawing board recently and rewrote the book from start to finish. And now, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose is set 20 years into the future, when perhaps AI plays a much larger role in society and culture, and where things are even more tumultuous than the stormy present that we live in now. And there's a presidential election. And there's a lot of intrigue about the current president and his plans for reelection. He's not well liked. And there is a sense that he might be trying to rig the election. And my black lab is on high alert, so she's going to bark. Hopefully she'll stop in a second. But so the essence of the story is, what are the boundaries of political corruption in the United States, and what role will AI play? And how can we as a society move on from she's distracting me. Sorry about that. So in essence, political corruption, political violence, where are these all going? And can we be pulled back from the brink?
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like this is a rip from the headlines book. Did you take a lot of inspiration from current political climate, or did you do research on past political, or is it maybe a little bit just of your imagination?
Well, honestly, I spent 20 years working in politics.
Okay.
And so I was on the front line of campaigns from dog catcher to president of the United States, and got to see up close and personal some of these dynamics. When people are running for office, what happens to them? Does it transform them? Does winning become more important than their relationships and their sense of self, right? So some of that influenced the story. And, part of this is also kind of ripped from the headlines. Remember, I said I wrote this book 20 years ago, or at least started it. In the first draft, the president refuses to accept the results of the election and won't leave office. And so there was like a lot of kind of echoes to some of the events in the recent past in U.S. history. And so when I rewrote it, I said, boy, I've got to find a way to make this a little more unbelievable, a little more fantastical. So I tried to stretch things even further in the story. And in the process, I thought, boy, I'm going to reach for some things that might be like way off, the reservation. And unfortunately, some of the things continue to come true in the story. Assassination attempts, billionaire financiers of candidates, collusion between parties. It all seems to be just, coming true in real time. And for a thriller writer, that's kind of scary.
I will say the same thing. I wrote a dystopian fiction book that I released in 2019 about a worldwide pandemic. And even in my book, they blamed the Chinese initially for the pandemic. And 2020 came and I was like,
ooh. All right, Trisha, you and I are in the same club then.
Right. Not surprisingly, the book has not really done that well. But we'll get back to, so you started writing this, so 2004 you started writing this?
Yeah.
And I think was George W. Bush president
Yeah.
then? Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't think he was too corrupt, but
No. So
no,
what was
yeah,
happening was kind of the post 9/11 world
right.
and the sudden like 24-hour news cycle had emerged right after 9/11 and this sense of like unending war and executive power reach. So those were some themes that I was looking at 20 years ago. And I was, thinking about these crazy things of, abuse of power. In the story, it does center around the essence of the Bull Moose Party, which is a party from our history, goes back to about 100 years ago. Um, Teddy Roosevelt came out of retirement to run for president again and couldn't win his party's nomination, so he left and went and got a hold of the Progressive Party at the time and translated it into the Bull Moose Party. And so the theory in my work of fiction here, what it takes to kill a bull moose is, what happens if the political parties in America are, so useless or so indistinguishable in their inability to get anything done that there is finally a time for an emergence of a viable new party. And what if that new party is one from our history, the Bull Moose Party? And I explore in the book not questions of left and right, but questions of status quo versus reform. And I think that's what's been attractive for the book because it's really challenging to write political thriller and get wound up in modern politics. You can alienate entire groups of readers if you write a strictly left story or a strictly right story. And I was trying to write something that really was trying to move beyond left and right and talk about reform versus status quo. And so far, it's been successful in finding a readership who's interested in that interesting hypothesis. But let me tell you, it's not easy because my editor was telling me all along, if you try to talk to everyone in politics, you'll end up talking to no one. So it's a lesson I've been very careful when I'm talking about the book and talking to folks about why they might want to read it.
Interesting. Yeah, so I'm not a history or politics buff, and
Yeah.
I've never heard of the Bull Moose Party. So that's very interesting to me that you brought back something. Are you a historian or just
No,
like
but I
politics?
I like politics. I taught English, right? And it just always had this fascination with some of these interesting stories from history. And when I'm not reading fiction, I tend to be reading historical biographies. And Candace Millard is a wonderful historical biographical writer. And she wrote this story called River of Doubt. It's about Teddy Roosevelt after he loses the presidential election in 1912. He kind of goes on a journey into the Amazon to find the source of the Amazon River and nearly dies because of it. And his life is likely shortened by that trip because of all the disease and stress on his body from trying to
Right.
survive that trip. He lost like 40 pounds. But I just find it fascinating to go pull from history these threads of things that we have forgotten that are not part of the common constant churn of history of our history and bring them forward and think about like what if. And so the Bull Moose Party for me was a really fascinating what if because it's the last time in our history that a viable third party actually won electoral votes in the presidential election, had a chance of winning the presidential election. You have to go back to Lincoln. His Republican Party was a third party when it emerged as a party to try to win a presidential election and became one of the dominant major two parties. So that's what I'm theorizing in the book is there space for either a third major party to emerge or will it eventually replace one of these other two? And in the book, I don't talk about D's and R's. I talk about the old party and the other party to make a point that they're so indistinguishable 20 years into the future that they don't even deserve to have names for the reader. They're just old and other, and the reader can try to guess, which is which.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I was talking to someone about like historically, we have been through time. I mean, it may feel really new to us right now, like how divided like the two parties are, but there have been times, like in Lincoln's time, when the country was so divided. And then it was geographically, now it's ideologically, right? But we have come back from that, of course. Someone pointed out, there was a civil war there, and we don't really want that again.
Yeah,
So, and this is supposed to be a series, correct?
it is. This is the first book in the series called Bull Moose series, and the book ends at a real ending. But the next book, book two, which comes out Election Day, this November 5th, picks up just minutes after the conclusion of book one. So, and I'm already working on book three. So yes, there's at least three books in the series. I'm aiming for, maybe six or seven. We'll see how the characters evolve over time.
Well, fine. Well, tell us about the major characters. Is the main character the one running for president?
Yeah, so the protagonist is a character named Jackson Piper. A little bit about Jackson. Jackson was a U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. He was a member of Congress. He is a former teacher, former lawyer. He is a reformer in his heart, and he starts off as a member of the other party. And when he's in the U.S. Senate, and he's running for his first reelection, and he's defeated before the book begins. And so when the book opens, you discover that his dream, they were whispers of him becoming president one day. Well, those dreams were shattered because he lost that reelection and he was swept aside by his party as someone they did not want. So he escapes to Colorado, takes his wife and his kids out there, and tries to hit the reset button on his life. And he's teaching at a college. He's trying to discover, what he's going to do with the next 40, 50 years of his life. He's in his 40s. And he's approached by two colleagues who used to work with him in the Senate and say there's a problem in DC. The sitting president, named Russell Warner, the antagonist of the story, is not well liked. He has some very bad tendencies. And it seems like Russell Warner is trying to rig his reelection. And this just strikes Piper as like the anti of what America is about, that people should fight fair and win fair. And whether or not Warner ought to be reelected, he shouldn't do it in a way that undermines the democratic process. But Jackson's not convinced that he ought to come out of retirement and run against Russell Warner. Now, Jackson is a 6'5", burly guy, beard. He's a woodsman type. He's a hunter. He's not your typical politician look. And he has to go talk to some mentors about whether or not he really could win an election if he tried to run again coming out of this retirement. And so some interesting people come up in the story, and the first major one is Ron Bender. Ron Bender is Jackson's chief of staff when he's in the Senate, and he's one of the two people that comes to visit Jackson in Colorado to convince him he ought to run for president. And Ron is not a lot like Jackson. Ron has made his career in politics in DC by cutting deals, by deceiving people, by being underhanded, by building relationships based on power. But Ron sees a real threat in Russell Warner winning re-election through nefarious means. And so Ron is trying to convince this do-gooder Jackson Piper to come back out of retirement and try to win the presidency. You've also got Jackson's wife, Dr. Catherine Piper. She's an oncologist. She's the breadwinner of the family since he is kind of trying to find himself. And she's all in on Jackson. She believes in him. But through the course of the book, that belief is going to start to cost her in very real, significant ways, her career, her family, her safety. And it starts to question for her, is politics really worth it? Is this country redeemable? Is it a nation that she ought to risk her entire livelihood and everything she holds dear and may not actually save it in the process? So it becomes a real battle for her. There's also some really fun characters in the story. I've got Valerie Lawrence. She's the governor of Texas. She wears a 6-shooter on her hip when she's dealing with the legislature. She's a young, charismatic 30-something. She's like maybe deserves her own like superhero franchise type. And she's full of Texas wit, and she is like Jackson, a reformer and a maverick. And they become quick friends when she comes to his defense because she's being attacked often for her approach to things. And so they form a very important and powerful alliance in the story, and one that ends up carrying them both forward into some pretty treacherous moments.
Yeah. So is this written from a first person or a third person point of view?
Third person point of view. So you get to see and hear the thoughts of kind of all these characters. And there are a lot of characters in the story. And maybe one other villain you should know about is Marco Alvarez, because he's essential to the story's plot. Marco is the guy financing Russell Warner's reelection. He's a billionaire. He owns a company called Juniper that is kind of the brainchild behind modern AI in the year 2044. And Marco Alvarez wants something, and he makes that very clear to President Warner. And at first, what he wants, Warner says no to. And so Alvarez backs off, and it's very clear that Warner's not going to be able to do this without Alvarez's help. And so then the price increases. And then you start to wonder if Alvarez is after something more as the story continues to unfold.
Well, yeah, I can tell there are a lot of good personalities here, and it would be very intriguing to be in the mind of someone who is in that place to run for probably the most powerful position in the world, I would think.
Indeed. Yeah.
Neat.
And I think that what we all maybe take for granted is that, and this is what I try to interweave in some of these characters, is particularly the president and Jackson Piper running for president. There's a lot of insecurity in these leaders. They convey confidence, they convey courage and strength, but when they're in their private thoughts, they're constantly wondering if they're doing the right thing, if they're the right person, or if people are out to get them. An insecure leader is a very dangerous leader at times, and so they're insecure in different ways, and it becomes apparent that they're all fallible. They're all flawed in their own way, but in what ways would you want your president to be flawed, and what ways would you not? And that's
Okay.
what
Right.
emerges.
Yeah. So I think about this as, everybody tells you like you're a good parent if you are always second guessing and thinking that you got it wrong. So I'm going to go with the person who is wondering if they're doing the right thing, not wondering who's behind my back doing something. I mean, doing something wrong. That's the scary thing to want. But hopefully it's the protagonist Jackson that we like and we're rooting for.
Yes, you're exactly right. Jackson's the one who wonders if he's the right person at the right time and if he has what it takes. And over time, he visits his mentor Reese Tolson, who she was the former governor of Pennsylvania, and she tells him, "Look, you've got the intelligence to do this job, but you don't have the grit. You're going to have to find that grit on the way campaigning for president to be able to stand up for what's coming your way, because you don't even know what these people are willing to do to stay in power." And at the end of the day, she says, Jackson, she gives him a stack of books to read, right? Because I love books too. And shows him all these examples where winning doesn't even matter. Getting the most votes in various times in our history has not secured the presidency. And she warns him that you could do all of this work, risk your life, get the most votes, and still not become president. And that's something he has to be aware of, is there might be more he has to do than just get the most votes in order to save the country.
Right. Interesting. So how much are you going to sacrifice to make a difference, and can you make the difference that you wanted to make? And yeah.
Yeah,
So
what if
we
it doesn't
won't
work
ask
out?
for the spoiler, the happily ever after ending.
Yeah.
Don't tell us if it's not a happily ever after ending.
I really struggle with writing, and as an author, you understand this. Like when you write an ending, which is the most important part of your book besides the first sentence, you can ruin a good book with a bad ending. Um, so you can either give the protagonist everything they wanted, you can give them nothing that they wanted, but they still work out, or you can just burn it all down and say, oh, it's a terrible ending, everyone dies. So I intend to provide the reader some hope that
Okay.
that all is not lost. This is, I would call it pre-dystopian literature. So it is, things are not completely hell in a handbasket yet, but there is some cause for hope by the end of the story for sure.
Okay. Yeah. My dystopian, it's also like environmentally dystopian. So mine's set like 60 years in the future. So maybe like 10 years after yours.
Yeah.
And we have global warming and we don't live south of even Colorado. We don't live south of Wyoming because it's too hot, and yeah, it's horrible. So hopefully that won't come true, but hopefully your scenario looks a little bit better.
Trisha, you and I are gonna have to compare some notes because yeah, global warming has happened in the story as well.
Oh, okay.
Part of what Jackson's talking with voters is like farming is like no longer a way of life for many people, and major industries like skiing up in Vermont is gone, right? These towns don't know what to do with themselves because no one comes to them anymore. And up in New Hampshire, which is the site of the first primary. So yeah, plays an important role in this story as well.
Yeah, I may need to read your book to get more, ideas on, because I do have an evil leader who's taken over the United States, and he's hogging all the vaccines for the
Ah,
US developed the vaccine, but they're not sharing it with anybody else. So only the people in the US are now well and not sick anymore. And of course, my heroes, I guess I should say, are the people who want to share the vaccine with the world. So I still haven't worked out how that's going to happen because I'm not sure I want to write that. So anyway, we'll go back to that topic later. But yes, we
yeah,
can talk offline for hours probably,
sounds great.
and I'll have to read your book to figure out what's going on. So you really can't tell us what's going to happen in the second book because then we would have to know what happened in the first book. So maybe we don't want to spoiler on
Well,
that.
what I can tell
Okay.
you is that the election has happened by the end of book one, and the beginning of book two. It hasn't really solved it, as Governor
Okay.
Tulson hinted. And
Okay.
so there are procedures in the Constitution that are starting to have to play out in January 2045. And there is a real fight to ensure that Congress actually does its duty under the Constitution. And there are people making some moves to try to prevent that in order to stay in power. And the book is called Tree of Liberty, which is a play on a quote by Thomas Jefferson that says, "From time to time, the tree of liberty has to be cared for with the natural manure of the blood of patriots and the blood of tyrants," suggesting that at times there's a cycle of revolution that must occur, and it may not always be peaceful. We are very lucky to only have one such period in our history, as you mentioned, the Civil War. And so book two, Tree of Liberty, is not about necessarily a civil war, but it is about like an Arab Spring. If you think about the year 20, I think 15, some of the things that were happening across the Middle East of popular democratic reform, people going into the streets and demonstrating, ensuring that their popular will would be observed and that despots could be turned from office. And so that's a good hint on what
Okay.
awaits the reader in Tree of Liberty.
Oh, fine. And I love your cover. We can see it a little bit in the
Yeah.
background, but the moose with the American flag on him, that's a brilliant idea for the
It's
cover.
such an iconic, for those listening only, cover is black, kind of like I think maybe Hunger Games or what was the Twilight series. So black cover. The only thing you can see is a burned seal of the President of the United States and the head of a bull moose, but it is fur is red, white, and blue like an American flag. And that was always the image in my mind of this cover 20 years ago when I started writing the book. And through the power of AI and some good artwork, you're able to make it come to life. So I absolutely love this cover. It is the thing people gravitate to immediately when I'm at a book fair. They pick this book up and say, "This is cool. What is this about?" So,
Right. Nice. Well, congratulations, 20 years in the making. Your book is published and your second one is coming out. So that's Tree of Liberty is the second
yep,
book. And so talking about AI, that did remind me, I was looking at said there was a little bit of twist of science fiction in this book or maybe in the series. Can you tell me more about that?
absolutely. And this was the part of my writing that I hesitated with at first because I was strictly viewing myself as a thriller writer. And although I love science fiction, especially in my film and streaming series, I didn't necessarily see myself as fitting into the science fiction genre. Remember, I was a teacher though, and I had taught Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, which I loved. It was my favorite book to teach. And I could go on and on about the brilliance of that story and all the symbolism and the science fiction of Bradbury. But what I discovered was there is a vein of science fiction that was called philosophical science fiction, which was Bradbury's writing and some others that kind of explored the political undertones of futuristic thinking. And so I suddenly got very excited about, could I reinvent this story by infusing some science fiction edge to it? And also inspired by Michael Crichton and his techno thrillers, where he really leaned into this stuff with Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, which I was a huge fan of growing up. So, I did my research. I tried to think about like what could be coming in AI in 20 years and how would that change the landscape. And the way that for me it became exciting was I created a sentient AI character, a character named Ziggy, a little homage to Quantum Leap for listeners who remember that series when we were growing up. And Ziggy is sentient, but no one really talks about it. She has a complete awareness of what's going on. She belongs to Ron Bender. He is afraid of being lonely, afraid of loneliness. So he literally has a programmed assistant who dotes on him and is, at his beck and call. But she's fully aware of the world around her. She's aware of people, and she is completely assistive at a moment's notice. In the prequel to this book called The Senate Deception, which is my novella, she's helping Ron Bender and Jackson Piper cram for a late night legislative session. And she says, well, what you guys want to eat? And he said, something that'll keep us awake. She orders Chinese, but when she calls the Chinese restaurant up, she orders literally in Mandarin. So this is the type of stuff that you can have fun with when you write with a futuristic edge and an AI character who can just kind of go in all directions. And in the book, AI plays a really important role for two reasons. One, Juniper is kind of this company that has transformed the American economy through its production of an AI system that takes over kind of all aspects of life. And there's in the beginning of the book talk about the ways that um, the successor to AI we call SI, simulated intelligence, takes over the economy in ways that it just takes people out of jobs, takes the service industry out of jobs, takes food service industry people out of work, takes over basically all taxi driving, Uber, all customer service jobs are performed by these simulated intelligent assistants. And so it has this positive effect about making life easier, but a negative effect in like, losing millions of jobs from the economy that are not replaced. And this becomes an important part of the story because Alvarez makes all of his billions from his AI empire, and he seems to be wanting more from SI and AI, and that kind of unfolds in the story as maybe there's something to what he's trying to do by his cozying up to Russell Warner. And the
Okay.
second way it plays an important role is Ziggy. She's this character that quickly emerges as the one most powerful enough to defend Piper against Russell Warner and the attacks because when they need her most, she has access to records and systems and things that can deploy defenses far faster and quicker than humans can do. And so it became a really an exciting way to move the story in a thrilling way.
That's very cool. Yeah, I guess if you're going to set a book in the future, you have to have some element of science fiction to make it work, right? I mean,
Yeah. People expect things to have changed, right?
right?
So
Yeah, it's not going to stay exactly the same it is today. So
yeah.
neat. So you hinted on a prequel novella. Tell me
Yep.
about that.
Yeah, it's called The Senate Deception. And it's free on my website,
Okay.
michaelfedorbooks.com. If you want to download an ebook, you can kind of test out my writing by reading the novella. And the first four chapters of What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose are also included in the ebook. So you also get a taste for what it takes to kill a bull moose by downloading it. And it's set 5 years before the start of Bull Moose. So Jackson's still in the Senate. So is Russell Warner. He's a senator, not president yet.
Okay.
And the book hinges on a blackmail plot to get Jackson Piper to reform the Senate filibuster, which is in the news like every 6 to 8 months in the US. It was just in the news last week. And the filibuster, Jackson's trying to reform it in a way that will restore to what it was originally intended to be. But the reason he's doing it is not because he just wants to reform the Senate. He's being blackmailed into doing it. And there is a whole plot that emerges that ends up costing someone their life in the course of the debate over changing this rule. And it's a little taste into the intrigue. And like I said, Ziggy's in the book, so you also get a taste for the science fiction early on in the story. She's
Oh,
like
that sounds so
in the
fun.
first
Yeah.
chapter.
Very fun. Well, I'm sure all of our listeners are going to like go to your website right now and download the free novella. And it doesn't give anything away to read the prequel novella for the To Kill a Bull Moose, right?
No, it doesn't. In fact, if you read What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, they refer to the filibuster fight and oh how bad it was, but they don't give everything away. So you kind
Okay.
of leave reading Bull Moose going, huh, I'm gonna go
Oh,
back and read the Senate deception. Or likewise, you can read the Senate deception and you will be ready to go, exactly knowing who Jackson is, who Ron Bender is, who Ziggy is, and why Russell Warner hates Jackson Piper by the time you start reading What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose.
awesome. Fun, fun. So tell us where we can find your books.
So you can get my books direct to my website, Michael Fedor, Fedor, books.com. I have a shop there. You can buy all these books in ebook, print, audiobook as well. I'm also widely distributed. So you get me on Amazon, Apple, Chirp, um, Ingram Spark, and then anywhere else you buy, Barnes and Noble. If you go to my website, I literally have links to all those stores, and I'm sure there are others that I don't even know about yet that are popping up. But it's great because I know I've found that my readers are some folks want to get direct from author, some have their subscription services with Kobo and Chirp and Amazon, and so I felt by being wide, I'll be able to reach as many readers as possible.
Yeah, I'm a lover of audiobooks, so that's I will definitely listen.
Good, please do. And that's it's a 12-hour book, so it's great value. It's a long book. It's a little it was a little challenging as a first-time author out the gate to cut this story down to 100,000 words. So it's a little
Yeah,
longer than
it
that.
is
It's a
long.
400-page book, but it moves quick, it moves fast, doesn't drag on. So I think people will be really excited to read it or
Well,
listen.
fun. I'm excited to read it, so you've convinced me.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being here, and hopefully within a couple of months we can have you back to talk about your new book too.
I would love that. And anytime you want to talk about AI or climate change or you want to brainstorm your next dystopian plot line, you call me. I'll be ready to go.
Okay, thank you so much. I will definitely do that.
Thanks, Trisha.
Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.